Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of IET India's Walk the Tech Talk series season 2 in association with India Automated. In case you have missed out on any of our previous episodes or episodes of season 1 of Walk the Tech Talk series, then please do check them out on IET India's YouTube channel. Before we begin with today's episode, I would like to give you a sneak peek into the world of the IET. The Institution of Engineering and Technology is one of the oldest and largest professional society for engineers. Soon to turn 150, our mission is to engineer a better world. Our areas of focus include future of mobility and transport, future of work, and future technologies. In case you would like to become a member of the IET, all that you will need to do is send us an email at indiamembership@theiet.in. Now, without further delay, I would like to welcome on stage your host for this series, Mr. Pranjal Sharma, the author of India Automated, to take over and introduce our speaker guest and the topic for discussion today.
Thank you, Johnny. And joining us today for a conversation on what the tech talk is Latika Pai, who's the country head Microsoft for startups. Thank you for joining us today, Latika.
Great to be here, Pranjal. Appreciate being invited to speak at the show.
So, Latika, it's counterintuitive that for a large giant like Microsoft, there is still some involvement with startups. So, tell us a little bit about what you do, what is your role, and why is Microsoft involved with startups?
So I think I probably have the best job in the company, because I get to work with a platform like Microsoft, but my focus is on startups. Having been an entrepreneur myself, I've had multiple stints. I never thought I'd be back in the corporate world doing a job, right? But the reason why I took this job is because of the fact that giants like Microsoft are looking at engaging with startups early and helping leverage our platform, not just from a technology perspective, but also from a go-to-market perspective in helping tech startups. How do we do this, Pranjal? From a tech perspective, of course, we have our Azure cloud platform. We have our infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, which includes our AI, cognitive ML capabilities, IoT, Internet of Things that we bring to the table. But most importantly, from a go-to-sell, which is also very, very important to a startup, which is to take our startups to enterprise clients globally. What do I mean by that is that, for example, if there's a fintech startup who sells into a bank in India, right? How do we take that to other banks in India? Because Microsoft is already engaged at some level with almost every enterprise globally, small, medium, large enterprises, right? We have history with almost every company in the world. So the ability to take our startups to our enterprise clients is something that is very, very powerful, which I see great value coming to the startups, and that's why startups come to Microsoft to engage with our platform. I think in my role, I've seen in the past, I would say a couple of years that I've been here, I've seen over, 1,000 startups across 15 different countries. It's always super exciting to engage with entrepreneurs, at the same time, tell them about what we can do for them as Microsoft.
So, Latika, what is the kind of support that is provided to these startups? You're talking about go-to-market services. You're also talking about investment. So, what are the suite of support services that you offer to the startups?
So we have, all of the above from Microsoft, but my group, for example, works on looking at the technology that a startup is trying to build, and how do we help them leverage the technology that already exists in our Azure platform, right? You don't need to invent things from scratch. You can leverage what we have and get the product out sooner and go to market earlier. The second, from a business perspective, when we look at the business, we say, okay, are you looking to really scale your product in India? Are you looking at going into the region, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, or are you looking at going to the US? Depending on what the startup does, we would talk to a startup, a couple of days ago, and the founder was very clear. He says, I have India as a market. I don't need to go anywhere else. So how do we actually help this startup? Because, he is again in the fintech space, and they're looking at engaging with banks in India. So the focus would be to say, okay, if it's going to take you, 6 months to get in front of a CXO within that market, how do we as Microsoft take you into that account and help sell your, what your technology that your startup has built? So go to market, it can be in region, in country, in region, or globally is what we bring to the table, right? From a fund infusion perspective, another arm of us, M12, which is the Microsoft Ventures, they invest money. So that at every level, we look at how we can engage the startups. What we find, Pranjal, most importantly, is that our deal flow comes from VCs. The VCs are the ones who invest the money, but what they really need, in terms of helping their portfolio company is on the technology, so that they're not, the money that's been given to the startup is not, really burnt creating tech from scratch, versus leveraging tech that is available so that they can go to market earlier, and two, most importantly, our go to market capabilities that we have. Why does Microsoft do it? It's very simple, right? If you are on Azure, on our cloud platform, when you grow, the more Azure you leverage, you use, it's more revenues for us. So this is from a truly a business reason why Microsoft does this, right? In terms of engaging with startups, bringing them onto our market, Azure Marketplace listing, and then co-sell ready. It works for Microsoft. It works for the startup, and it works for the investor. That's why our program is so powerful.
This appears like a win-win for everybody, as you explain, Latika. But in terms of the technologies being used, is there a pattern that you notice? Are certain types of technologies being used more than others?
So, to a couple of things, we're now almost 9 months into the pandemic, right? I remember in March when all of us were just, yeah, I think the whole world came to a stop and standstill, and everybody was wondering, what, is doomsday just around the corner, right? What's been fascinating, Pranjal, is that I haven't heard from many of my startup founders to say that they're shutting shop, right? Because I think what everybody, the ones at least that we've been working with, they've been pretty agile on cutting costs and making sure that they had runway. And more importantly, I think during this, during the pandemic, many of them realized that they became more, I would say, agile in terms of pivoting into areas that were very important, that kind of sprung up. What do I mean by this is that we saw a huge surge, of course, in health tech in terms of telemedicine that was out there. We saw e-learning startups. One of our portfolio companies, which had about 20,000 at the start of the pandemic, has grown tenfold. Right, they have close to 250,000 students now on their platform. So in terms of trends, yes, health tech, fintech, and ed tech has really taken off. I mean, today it's just so fascinating that GPay is everywhere, right? Whether GPay, Paytm, PhonePe, everyone is using. So that hockey stick curve that came in terms of adopting technology that everybody wishes for, that's what the pandemic brought in many of these areas. Even if you look at, I would say, sectors like agri-tech, right? Farmers, for example, there's a lot that was going on. They required smartphones to engage with in terms of selling their products, etc. There are, startups out there who are working with farmers, and we've seen again something like agri-tech also take off, right? Just the whole digital adoption has increased as a result of the pandemic. And what's interesting is personally, in my startups, I've made money when I didn't raise money. When I bootstrapped was when every month I used to bang my head against the wall. I keep telling people, I said, that wall out there which has that black mark, that's me banging my head against it, trying to figure out how to make payroll and pay for all my services, is because I didn't have money. I just bootstrap, right? Being profitable was something that was cash flow positive, or something that was simple, old-fashioned business sense. Because you didn't have the push was growth at any expense. And I think that's something that I've seen many of the startups adopting. I mean, this used to be my mantra. I tell them it's old-fashioned. I said, and I would tell them, listen, the only reason I'm telling you is that, you know, I didn't do well when I raised money, whether it was equity or whether it was debt, right? Because growth was something that was more, versus when I didn't have the money and was a little bit more conservative. So I think some of the more old-fashioned ways of doing businesses come in. That's also what VCs are looking at, saying that, hey, I don't really care if you have vanity metrics of millions, hundreds of millions of users. I'm more interested in saying that, okay, how are you going to monetize, and what is that is going, how are you going to get to cash flow, positive. So that's also what the pandemic really, brought about.
There's another very exciting and interesting hat that you wear is as a founder of Sonder Connect, which aims to support female founders. So tell us, Latika, what is this initiative all about? Why is this focus on female founders?
Great. Yes. So Sonder Connect was an organization that I started in 2016. Brought in a bunch of other, I would say, mostly female leaders, some male leaders, only because of the fact that the female leaders really, really wanted to give back and pay it forward and do something different. And we came together to start Sonder Connect. Initially, the thought was, let's create an angel fund to support female founders, because wherever you read globally, right, you hear about how funding for female founders does not exist. It's so much harder for female founders to exist. So the original plan was to create a fund. Literally in days, I had commitments, and I could have raised an angel fund. But what was struck me when I was looking at it was that more than funding, what female founders really needed was a network, B, to create an environment where they had support in terms of scaling. And if they were able to show that, that would be something that there were plenty of investors ready to invest in. So the network was something that they required. They needed the help in terms of bringing them from say ideation, inception. We actually work with founders who already have a product, who are looking to scale. That's really the profile. We don't look at the ideation and inception, and they are revenue generating and they come into the fold. So our focus was very clear. How do we find female founders who can get the help that they need from a network perspective?
From what you say, it appears there can be two possible types of challenges to these female founders, Latika. One is, of course, to encourage more and more women to begin their startups, to launch their companies and get into enterprises from perhaps their jobs. And second is those who are already there to help them grow and help them become bigger. Now, what are the kind of challenges that you see in the experience that you've had so far?
Actually, I think it's the latter. I think there are several women entrepreneurs here. They get to a particular stage. The scaling is the biggest challenge, Pranjal, right? That's what we focus on, is helping them scale. And I would say so every year we look to working with not more than 12 to 20 in each cohort. We have so far date worked with 70 female founders. It's been absolutely phenomenal. We have PhDs who created cancer diagnostic markers. One wants to send 200 satellites up. There are other in the sustainable, space. Splainer is one which is focused on creating a newsletter for female, for women, the urban and semi-urban women, on coursing diagnostics. So these female founders, we were just kind of doing a checkpoint in terms of where we are. They are really doing extremely well. From our portfolio of about 70, I would say about 20% have shut down, because and that was part of the advice, which was like, don't, to scale, you need to put in much more. At this particular point, you're not going in the path that you'd like to. It's better you cut your losses and look at something else, right? This is like any VC portfolio also. It's not good that you get 100% hit rate, but to think that 80% of them are still there. 36 million was raised by these founders, by some of the founders put together. it's been phenomenal in terms of seeing how they track. In fact, we have our next cohort in January, supported by the Target Accelerator. We have startups, female founders, not just from India. We've had some from Jordan, from Morocco, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh as being part of it. And this year we plan to kind of scale it across Asia, right?
You're talking about scale because that's critical for all startups, not just for female founders. But apart from that, are there specific challenges that you see that female founders face that perhaps others don't?
So you're absolutely right, Pranjal. What I do in my day job at Microsoft in working with founders, helping them to scale. Many of the challenges are similar. I'll tell you the biggest what is different is that I find globally female founders tend to be very conservative. They need there is a lot of inhibition and diffidence in terms of how they approach, and some of it is good. Being conservative is good, but you can't be at one end of the spectrum, right? So what we do is we work with them in giving them the confidence in terms of being able to help them understand that they need to step on it to get to a particular level of scaling. So that is a common theme that we find. Technology is something that we find across the board challenge for female founders, right? Very few of them come from a tech background. I know personally I come from a tech background, and that's really helped me. But many of them do not come from a tech background. And third, what's also interesting is finance. They find it rather challenging, right? So they don't want to focus on finance. So the two things we work on, and I personally keep telling the female founders, is that you absolutely need to understand basics of technology. What is the platform that you're building on versus saying I'm outsourcing it. I'm trying to find a co-founder, or outsourcing it to a partner. And two, you need to understand your books. You cannot give your books to be read by an accountant and then wake up one day and say, oops, there's been a problem, right? So these are, I would say, a common theme that I've found. I'm not saying that male founders are much better, but I think there is more focus on the P&L, and definitely male founders, because of the network, land up having either their techies themselves, or they have access to techies. So that's something that we are definitely working on very closely with female founders.
Well, Latika, that's wonderful to know. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, both as the head of Microsoft Startup as well as your work with female founders at Sounder Connect. It's been very inspirational to hear about your experiences. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pranjal. It's been an honor to be here and talk to you. Appreciate all the kind words.